1934 was a drought year, and it was a record heat year. So keeping in mind, in 1934, there was almost no air conditioning, and so people were lucky just to have a fan, and it was a very, very hot, dry year in 1934 when Dorsey Howe began his career here at the funeral home.
In the sweltering heat of Missouri's hottest summer on record, Dorsey Howe arrived at the Holman Funeral Home with little more than ambition and a willingness to learn. He started at the very bottom, scrubbing floors and gently guiding grieving families through their first steps, and quickly proved his dedication. By 1939, fresh from mortuary school, he stepped into leadership and, without realizing it, laid the foundation for a 3-generation legacy of compassion, care in Lebanon, Missouri. This is The Home, Part 2, Dorsey Howe.
So my father actually started here at Dorsey Howe in 1934. He was just out of high school. Actually was still in high school, I believe. Then, after that, my father went back and continued his education. He went to Southwest Missouri State Teachers College, which was very unusual for someone in this era to go to college. He came back and actually taught school for a while, and then came back here and began his full career at the funeral home in 1939, after which he graduated from mortuary college. And so there's been a Howe here in this building since 1939, probably every day of the week in some sort or another.
1939 was a perilous year. The nation was just emerging from the depths of the Great Depression, hoping for brighter days, yet shadowed by ominous news from abroad. As Hitler swept across Europe, Americans braced for the possibility that their country would soon be drawn into World War II.
And my father always told the story of whenever he heard immediately I think he was here in the office, that he heard that on the radio that Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor.
This is John Daly speaking from the CBS newsroom in New York. Here is the Far East situation as reported to this moment. The Japanese have attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and our defense facilities at Manila, capital of the Philippines.
And so that story resonated very quickly. And of course, everyone was tuned to the radio, listening and waiting for President Roosevelt to respond. Fort Leonard Wood was just in the process of being built. And so there was a lot of activity going on in Southwest Missouri, even preparing for war.
In late 1940, as war swept across Europe and Asia, the Army chose South Central Missouri for a new training center. On December 3rd, military and state officials broke ground on the 7th Corps Area Training Center. And in January 1941, it was renamed Fort Leonard Wood for Major General Leonard Wood. In 6 muddy months, crews built 1,600 buildings and laid rail spurs to support the 6th Infantry Division and engineer trainees heading off to every theater of World War II.
And so they sought out the funeral homes of the area that were capable of taking on the responsibility of the casualty service that would be provided if and when people at the fort were killed on the base. And they were also asking for backup ambulance service whenever they had ambulance service needs that they could not provide with the military ambulances that were on base. And my father always told with such very much interest, that wasn't always an easy assignment, because you might have something going on at the fort, an accident taking place, and then you might have someone in a competition or Eldridge that had to have a service as well. And so it was very, very interesting times. Elmer Holman was very much an entrepreneur, and he saw a need for the people of Lebanon to have access to Fort Leonard Wood other than by car.
In 1940, building Fort Leonard Wood meant reshaping Route 66, straightening curves, blasting the Hooker Cut, and widening the road to 4 lanes so military convoys could move in and out without delay. Wartime gas and tire rationing, however, made the 30-mile drive from Lebanon by private car very difficult. Holman bus lines started with 6 daily round trips on Route 66, carrying soldiers, civilian workers, and visiting families between Lebanon and the fort. They maintained those bus lines throughout the war. On January 15, 1945, Waynesville's Blue Line bus service purchased Holman Howe routes and kept those 6 Lebanon to Fort Leonard Wood schedules intact, and added runs from Crocker to Dixon. The combination of Route 66 upgrades and Holman's buses ensured Lebanon remained a lifeline for Fort Leonard Wood and the broader war effort.
So following World War II, the entire country, and not anything less so Lebanon, started to really take off. There was a lot of development, economic development in Lebanon. We have pictures of the 1947 office edition on the funeral home, and that brought about a time of excitement and anticipation. 1949 was the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the founding of Lebanon, and we have some very nice pictures of a very brand new hearse that was in the parade in 1949. My father always told the story of during the centennial parade, there was a very tragic air crash in Lebanon. There was a plane crashed over Orchard Hills, and they called the funeral home for the ambulance. And he had actually, I believe, been in the parade and was at the very front of it and had come back to the funeral home whenever the plane crashed out in Orchard Hills, and 2 people were killed. So in the late 1940s, my father lost his first wife. She had become ill and had left him with 3 children, small children. And then it was very difficult. And my dad would speak about the difficulty of having 3 small children to raise. And that was a very unusual thing for a single father to have 3 children in the 40s. And there wasn't any textbooks on how to do that. And then he met my mother in the late 40s, and in 1950, in March, the 10th of March, they were married. And so they began a long career where she ended up raising his family, the children, and then there were 3 more of us children that came along later. My mother entered funeral service. She came in and started helping my father immediately. Well, my dad was one of the kindest, most generous men that I ever knew. He was very quiet spoken, and he had a very, very dry wit. He was raised by his grandmother, and both my parents had a lot of tragedy in their early life, but my father's mother died at his birth. Then his father remarried and then had a stepmother for a while, and they had other siblings. Then she died. So all the children then were raised by the grandmother. And so he, in some ways, had a very stoic mindset about him because he was out of a generation that was not lovey-dovey, but he didn't have a lot of hobbies. He enjoyed antique steam engines, which was his big vice and hobby. He loved smoking a pipe. He loved having a good fountain pen because everything back then was done in legal black ink, and he had a new Parker pen regularly. And when he passed away, there was more than one Parker pen to be dispersed to different people that had an interest in him. And so he did appreciate a fine pen, and he did appreciate a fine pipe. But he was always a person of service. Whenever he was around, he was always the first one out on the call. He went on almost every death call until he was well into his 70s. He was first man out on the ambulance calls. He would always be the one to take the worst assignment, and people always remembered that. And it wasn't always easy for my mother because he was gone a lot, but he was very dedicated to the families that he served, and he took the profession very seriously. And he took, as we do today, it is a very high compliment when families chose us, and he wanted to give his very best in every way that he possibly could.
In 1955, Elmer Holman sells Holman Funeral Home to Dorsey and his family, cementing the legacy of Holman Howe as a 3 generations ran business. In part 3, we will look at the Howe family as they expand and grow the home. Special thanks to Kenny and Taylor Howe for granting access to make this documentary possible, to Eric Tudor for the incredible research, and to Luke Kenworthy for the drone footage. And thank you, the viewer, for making this project possible. Download the Lebanon Now app for alerts on upcoming episodes and exclusive extra features. This has been a Lebanon Now documentary presentation.